Is it that a child going to that private school is suddenly going to become very confident because they went there, or were they always going to be like that?
So why are people sending their kids to private schools?
There are loads of reasons, and every parent has their own, but one of the things that comes up a lot is this idea of confidence. Some people I've heard talk about it as private school energy, which is an interesting concept. I suppose it's worth interrogating because only 5.9% of British children are educated privately, yet 65% of top judges were privately educated, 52% of diplomats, 45% of people on the Sunday Times rich list, 65% of Rishi Sunak's current cabinet. That's a massive proportion of people considering how small the number of privately educated kids actually is. It's interesting because those jobs don't suggest wallflowers with imposter syndrome. They suggest confidence, self-assuredness. You can't be a prime minister if you're quivering in the back, kind of worrying about whether you fit in.
So what are parents actually paying for?
What's really difficult in terms of assessing the value of private education is that it's impossible to know to what extent school is the thing that's making a child that confident. So lots of studies show it's socioeconomic background of the parents, how you've grown up that is going to indicate how confident and sort of the access you have to things in the future, that kind of golden ticket that some of our prime ministers have had. Is it that a child going to that private school is suddenly going to become very confident because they went there, or were they always going to be like that? If you've grown up really privileged, told that the world is your oyster, you've got money, you haven't got the worries that lots of children with much, much more difficult socioeconomic backgrounds have, it's not that surprising that you might end up being really confident, believing that you can do anything. I mean, that just makes sense. I think what we don't hear so much about, though, is the other side of it. We get a lot of confirmation bias because we see people like Boris Johnson, who we know went to Eton, blustering his way through, and we're like, wow, that's kind of private school confidence. Yeah. Whatever you think of him, right, he's got it. But actually, we don't hear so much about the children who emerge from private school kind of quivering wrecks, like buckling under academic pressure from the top grades. We don't necessarily hear about the kids who go off the rails, and we don't really hear about the kids that kind of can't interact with people from different backgrounds. And that's a massive generalisation. There are loads of private school kids who absolutely can. But again, I think it massively depends on your upbringing. But it's not that every single child who attends a private school is going to be some kind of confident would-be prime minister.
How's your own experience of private school education impacted what you think about this?
So I went to a local comprehensive, which was in like one of the most diverse bits of London, but it was also one of the most deprived bits. So had a massive range of kids there, and that was great and bad in the way that school is. It can be good and bad. That's just to do with going to school. And then I went to a fee-paying school that had kids sort of with mansions and swimming pools. And again, like that had its bad and good sides. One thing I think is really interesting is that, I've certainly spoken to parents who've said, well, I wanted my child to go to private school because I thought, that would keep them out of trouble, on the right side of the tracks, like focused. But I would say that my experience was not like that, in the sense that if you want to find trouble, you can find it anywhere. And I have never seen so much booze or so many drugs as at my private school, I have to say. And there were loads of good things about it, but it was more wild than anything that any of my state school friends experienced. And that just might be that school, but I don't think it is. I think anecdotally that happens a lot. And there are studies to show that kids at private schools are more likely to start drinking earlier and sort of indulge in risky behaviour, which is quite interesting too. So it's just not as clear-cut as this equals safety for your kid and this doesn't. It's just so much more complicated than that.
Is it just the education that the parents are paying for when it comes to private schools?
Yeah, I think private schools are, and the reason maybe there's such a huge debate in our society is that they're at the heart of what we consider to be inequality or structural problems in society. And it's a very complicated topic, but ultimately, I think traditionally people paid for their children to go to private school because it was a hot ticket to a golden future. I think that is changing slightly, but actually it's about beyond school, isn't it? Like school is one thing, but you need companies, universities, businesses, every part of society to kind of look beyond school and pick people who are great and pick people who kind of don't necessarily tick the boxes that they're used to, because the thing is, obviously, certain types of private school people, maybe who went to Eton, might recognise other Etonians and be like, right, they are who I want. That's just a natural way that humans respond. And I think there is more awareness of this now, but ultimately that is the problem we have in society.
Why do you think people will continue sending their kids to private schools in the future?
I think it's really interesting what will happen. I mean, I don't think private schools are going anywhere. And from the Etons and the Harrows to kind of the middling day schools, there's a massive range. I think some of the middling ones might struggle more because parents across the country with the funds to send their children are having to figure out whether they want to buy what these private schools are selling. We've got a future where Labour has proposed VAT on private schools, which will drive the costs up for parents, and private schools don't have that kind of stranglehold on Oxbridge that they once had. So they'll have to ask themselves big questions, and actually it's just really unclear, and we don't know whether private schools are worth it and what they're selling, because every parent has a different perception of that. But ultimately there will be some tough questions that I think parents will have to ask themselves.